We will hear argument this morning in case 2512.
Grievances we could go into with this system. I think we could be here for hours.
National Collegiate Athletic Association.
I think we have some proof, even a few years into NIL now, that people care about the logo.
There are too many people in power who have no desire to give up that power.
The NCAA's ever-shifting decisions, not stable decisions.
Does the concept of amateurism in college athletics even matter anymore?
They've capped it again without any sort of collective bargaining.
We'll finish with our unilateral decision.
All right, we are back for another episode of Unilateral Decisions. Dom is still out of town, so I'm sitting in his chair. A lot of news coming out this week. We could start with 5 for 5. We could start with the continuation of Sorsby, but something that seemingly flew under the radar this week is the adjustment to the CSC NIL Go rules. And Sam, let's just walk through what those rules are, how they changed, and then I've got a few follow-up questions on that.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, Tuesday of this week, we had a situation, we had the Sorsby news, we had the 5 for 5 news, and then right in the middle, we had this new news about the College Sports Commission changing kind of these thresholds for NIL Go review, NIL Go review, and again, something that really kind of just really poor timing in terms of when it was released. But I don't know, maybe it was by design. But so under the House settlement, we have those 3 prongs of injunctive relief. We have revenue sharing, we have roster limits, and we have NIL Go review. We have third-party NIL review. So these are the non-revenue sharing deals, the third-party NIL deals that have to go through this NIL Go system, be evaluated by an algorithm. And under the House settlement, any deal above $600 has to be submitted to NIL Go for review. But they've really slowly but surely kind of raised these thresholds about exactly when and how it actually has to be reviewed under the Deloitte algorithm. And what they did is they raised the threshold to $15,000 for it to trigger range of compensation review, which means, it's something where they're actually going to evaluate whether it is indeed or kind of fits the idea of fair market value, whether it's actually a range of compensation that actually kind of makes sense, or if it's something that seems more to really just be a back-ended way of doing pay-for-play. So, $15,000 now, which is a really dramatic increase. It's a huge increase from before. And it still has to be reviewed for the other prong of it, which is whether it's a valid business purpose, but definitely kind of intended to really kind of clear the way for a lot of these deals to, be cleared.
Okay, so any deal over $600 still must be submitted.
That's my interpretation, yes.
And then there's an aggregate component where as long as it doesn't reach $15,000, it's not subject to immediate review. But once it gets to $50,000, everything that's been submitted is up for review.
That's right, yeah.
Okay. Who gets to make the decision on changing this, and what is the process for changing this?
Well, as we've learned a little bit with, some of the objections that have been raised by class counsel, the CSC is really the ones making the rules here. They're the ones interpreting the House settlement in a way that they feel, kind of sees fit. Class counsel, which is, Jeff Kessler and Steve Berman, representing the House plaintiffs, they have the right to kind of object and kind of push things to Judge Cousins, who is overseeing the settlement from the court side, if it's something that they don't like. So, the interpretation of MMR deals as associated entities is something that's being currently challenged by class counsel right now. But this is one where I think it's pretty clear that class counsel is not going to really object to it. Why would they? Because it's really good for players. It's good for them. So, yeah, definitely something where, I think the House settlement is really kind of intended in a lot of ways to be kind of a quasi collective bargaining agreement, and any kind of changes has to be negotiated in good faith and, arm's length between labor and management. And it's the same kind of thing here, but something where if class counsel is not going to object, then the CSC can just do it themselves.
So why now? Why make these changes?
Because the Big Ten and the SEC have been complaining. because there's been a lot of deals that, mostly, not exclusively, but mostly the Big Ten and the SEC have been, kind of pushing to get cleared that, they've promised athletes, they said, we're going to let you do this. And then the College Sports Commission has, for the most part, kind of been just sitting on it. Not really sitting on it, but I mean, there's just so many deals that are going through the system. It's hard to evaluate them all. So this is really kind of intended to allow for increased efficiency, where kind of the smaller deals, which they're now defining, $15,000 is a lot of money, but, they're defining it now as kind of these smaller deals can go through a lot easier.
We'll get some opinions on all of this, toward the end of the show, but, I haven't gone through everything, Mike. With your background and everything you're involved with, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this entire concept.
I think the efficiency piece is really key. I think that, in my day job, we hear from schools all the time who are trying to understand what is the deal that we'll get through quickly. And I know a lot of people have spent a lot of waking hours on that over the last year, trying to understand, okay, is there a theme? Is there a pattern? Is there a specific deal type? Is there language I can use to ensure that this review will be expedited or, move through quickly or kind of be rubber stamped? And which are the deals that are getting hung up? And I think that there's just been a lot of hand wringing around deals that, frankly, aren't intended to be any sort of, under the table or anything like that, because that dollar value was pretty low. 15,000 is pretty high. Especially relative to 600, and we'll talk later about it being ambiguous. But I think that it makes a lot of sense from an efficiency standpoint. I think there was a lot of time and hours put into trying not only the reviews, which is a huge part of it, the review system and the people having to be responsible for that. And I would imagine the overhead that comes with that for something that really isn't changing or moving the needle. And then on the other side, you've got the schools, you've got the athletes, you've got their representatives, and to a certain degree, the businesses who are just trying to do something, and they're just trying to get it through. And there's a lot of mental gymnastics of wasted time around trying to figure out how you can write a deal so that a $900 offer to an athlete isn't going to take 3 months to be approved, and you're not jeopardizing that person's eligibility. So the difference between 600 and 15,000, would love to have a better understanding of how they arose at that number. But generally speaking, as far as raising that number, the threshold for why a range of compensation review would be triggered, I think makes a ton of sense.
Oh, like I said, we'll come back to this. In other news this week, 5 for 5. We've talked about it on the show. I think 5 for 5 has been a foregone conclusion for a while. I mean, even recently, I go way back. We've been talking about 5 for 5 in college athletics for a long time. But with that being said, we've talked about it. We've talked about the people that are being affected. We're talking about people that are being impacted the most. But before, this goes through and we start talking about, the fallout from it, is there anything that we haven't talked about that has arisen, Sam, or, since this has been, a point of contention or a discussion topic?
Well, I don't know if it's something we didn't talk about, but I think it's worth noting that the lawsuits have already started flooding in. We're recording this on Wednesday morning, and it was passed on Tuesday afternoon, and we already have our first lawsuit filed on behalf of 15 players in Ohio State Court. It's certainly not going to be the last one, based on reporting from people like Ross Dellinger, Trey Wallace, a lot of other people. Ryan Doughton and Darren Heitner have kind of created a plaintiff's dream team here, where both of them have been involved in a lot of this litigation. Heitner, of course, represented players like Caden Robinson and Tristan Smith, who just got an injunction, and a variety of other players, while Ryan Doughton, of course, was Pavia's attorney. Still, I'm sure, is Pavia's attorney, and also, represent or is kind of half of the plaintiff's class counsel team on the Patterson class action case, which sought injunctive relief on 5 for 5, so maybe they're going to drop part of that. But yeah, they've promised that they're going to file lawsuits on behalf of at least 50 different players in 5 different states, and we have one of them, and really kind of arguing a lot of the same kind of things that we've seen with the not necessarily related to medical stuff like we saw with Chambliss or Sorsby or Tristan Smith or anything else like that, but definitely arguing that leaving these players behind, that having kind of this carved out thing, or this one class that was, graduated too early to get the benefits of the COVID of the 5-5, but enroll too late to get the benefits of the COVID year. It really kind of violates the NCAA's duty of good faith and fair dealing to really have them compete against athletes who are getting their fifth year under the COVID year, but not being able to get that themselves.
Mike, I've heard. Were you going to say something? Because I was going to tee you up.
I was going to ask a follow-up question. I think that this piece of like the folks who are right in the middle and caught in between, I think that legal action was, we all saw coming. I'm curious, get through that year. I don't anticipate the legal challenges to these NCAA rules stopping. It's what we've spent this entire podcast talking about. And so what do you foresee being the legal challenge, the grounds that somebody would bring another suit forward based on 5-for-5, even though, because I guess I'll back up. The intention is you take out the waivers, you take out so many of the exceptions to eliminate some of the risk that the NCAA was facing where they were inconsistently applying some of these things, which is where a lot of the law litigation came from. So take that off the table. Now you've got 5-for-5, you've got the age thing coming into it. Where do you envision 2 years from now the next batch of lawsuits sort of stemming from?
Ironically, the fact that there's no more waivers anymore. Seriously. Yeah. I think there's an argument to be made, kind of similar to a lot of the cases that have been made that are not necessarily based in you handled my waiver request wrong, but instead looking at the NCAA bylaws, looking at what they promised to do, looking at what, the kind of the missions are and kind of promoting fairness and promoting, making sure that athletes are taken care of health-wise and mental health-wise. I think there's an argument to be made that the NCAA threw the baby out with the bathwater, where, you have a case like, and I realize it could overturn an appeal, but not on this issue. You have a case like, Judge Conley's opinion in the Furkurian case way back in, February 2025, where he said the NCAA needs to have some kind of meaningful exceptions. They need to be able to analyze kind of on a case-by-case basis. And I think there might be quite a few judges who agree with that, who say, you are, again, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's not something where the solution is to eliminate exceptions entirely, to eliminate the kind of this individualized review entirely, but something where you just need to make your waiver system better. You need to make it more efficient. You need to have, independent arbitration to review these cases, perhaps. I'm just throwing stuff out there, but I think that's a real angle for plaintiffs' attorneys to take here, where, you have a player where maybe they missed 2 or 3, major seasons due to an injury. Maybe you have a situation like Tyone Grant Foster, who was able to get an injunction because the first game of the season he suffered a heart attack on the court and missed the entire season and a half. Like, those situations are ones that I think are going to stand out to judges and certainly litigants and say, yeah, no, the NCAA should have done something about this.
Or a kid that doesn't play his first 2 years at school A, transfers to school B, plays immediately, and then says the only reason he didn't play was because of the coach at school A. And so he sues for 2 additional years and said, I'd have been playing the whole time. I lost my opportunities.
Yeah, that one might be harder to win just because I think judges will kind of understand that that's just kind of one of the risks of enrolling in a particular institution, and you're not necessarily guaranteed playing time. And, the NCAA Constitution and bylaws, the contracts that these lawsuits are based on now are, do not guarantee playing time. It's, more about like, if we're looking at kind of the good faith and fair dealing, if we're looking at, these particular breach of contract claims, I think you look at things like, guaranteeing protections for health and safety and that kind of thing as being like, yeah, if someone gets hurt, you need to accommodate that. But I mean, we'll see how judges take it.
I'm not going to be surprised to see anybody win any lawsuit at this point in time.
I think that's
all of the dust is settled on any of this.
I think that is a fair way of doing it. Like, I imagine that a lot of people listening to me are going to say, no, there's no possible way that anyone's going to win that. That's ludicrous. But I mean, yeah, I think the last year and a half, ever since the Pavia case, has taught us that judges sometimes make decisions that maybe we don't agree with, and maybe some of us agree with, some of us don't agree with, but it is that one judge who really kind of controls the cards. And, you know, sometimes they see something that we don't, or sometimes they make decisions that we don't agree with.
Yeah, 100%. Mike is a former, not just, sport administrator, not just a college athletics administrator, but a primary sport administrator. These kids that are having lawsuits filed, to take advantage of the 5-for-5 that are in that gap year, like if they win, what situation is presented to a school and a team that could negatively impact that program?
It's really tough when it flies in the face of one of the things of the House settlement was roster limits, right? Mm-hmm. And so that is really difficult. Now, I'm sure they can go through and do designated student athletes who don't, qualify for roster exemptions and whatever. Like there's ways. And I guess one of the answers is that kind of been through it. I mean, with COVID, with all the other, injunctions and different eligibility changes that have happened over the course of the last 5-6 years at this point, there is a little bit of, I think, comfort with dealing with that chaos. I think a lot of people want to see it go away, and a lot of people want it to be behind them. But I also think that if you're a coach who's looking at, one of your clear starters who's caught in the middle on this that you expected to have on your roster, I think you'd very, very easily take another year of this chaos, knowing that there's light at the end of the tunnel, to solve it and figure it out. It's going to be a challenge. I would imagine that if there is relief granted to this class of athletes, that they would be given some sort of that designated student athlete moniker that was utilized during COVID and everything, where it didn't count against the roster limits if you rostered one of those athletes. Because I think if you did that, you would see a swath of young athletes or fringe athletes who lose their opportunity, and you expose yourself to a whole new set of litigation around that. And so I do anticipate that if the relief is granted, that the athletes who are given that extra year and given the ability to compete would probably be treated differently than everybody else with regard to roster limits. But if you're planning for your season, if you're planning for your position competition and things like that, it is difficult. But yeah, I think that it's just a reality of where we've been for the last almost decade in college athletics, is that that's just kind of secondary. Mm-hmm. Like the on-field competition stuff, you just kind of let it sort itself out because you're more concerned about courtrooms and how players are going to get eligible, or if they're going to get eligible. And that's, as much as it kind of sucks to say it that way, that's what has to get handled first. And then you just kind of deal with the competition stuff, just kind of plays itself out. And it's unfortunate. And you can, complain all you want about how that's hard to plan for and how it's hard to have any stability, and that's what you want. But you also want your best players on the field. And so I think people will take that trade-off at least for another year if they feel like there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, they'll find money for it if it's going to improve the team.
Yeah.
I'm going to push back real quick on something you just said, because I think I'd be really, really surprised if we have anything like the designated student athlete provision again. I think that was a unique situation where the NCAA was really kind of forced into doing it by Judge Wilkin. And I think especially for a situation like this, the NCAA, they don't want to incentivize this kind of litigation. They don't want to, they've been really arguing in this litigation saying, hey, you're taking away opportunities for upcoming high school players, for these fringe players, as you're talking about. I think they want to kind of let that chaos kind of come from it if these athletes do win injunctions. And I will note that one thing that really stood out to me about the new lawsuit that was just filed, the direct kind of result of the 5-for-5, is they're also asking for an injunction of any kind of punishment for entering the transfer portal late. The so-called ghost rule provisions that we've talked about on the podcast that came into being a few months ago. And I think that's with the knowledge that these players, if they do get an injunction, are going to have to shop around and find a new team, and find a team that maybe still has some roster spots, even if it's not the team that they were playing for before. But yeah,
there might be one in Lubbock.
What's that?
There might be one in Lubbock.
There might be one in Lubbock if they're a quarterback. But yeah, I would be absolutely shocked if the NCAA did anything to really kind of streamline this. If anything, because again, they were forced into the DSA provision, and also the Pavia waiver bit them so hard. The Pavia waiver backfired in a really, really big way. So they're not going to do anything like that again.
I guess I foresee them being forced into it. I foresee the situation where the ruling, I can see a judge granting the injunction. Like, I don't think that's out of the question.
Not at all. This
class of athletes will be seen with some empathy and they will be granted that injunction. So I could see that happening. And once that happens, I don't know. My opinion is that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and you just kind of fold your cards and say, all right, 2027, here we come. Like, let's get through it. And you don't have to deal with the aftermath of the incoming freshman who thought they had a spot on the roster who now doesn't have a spot. And now you just snowball and domino effect all of these lawsuits. I don't know. I mean, I hear everything you're saying, and I'll be very curious to see how it shakes out.
Well, you say
maybe I'm more cynical than you are.
Depends on the topic. I don't know. Depends on the topic. You said let's get to 2027, but you were also asking Sam about, what do we see in the future? I mean, if we play your scenario out where their hand is forced, what if they miss the fall? Is the next wave of lawsuits going to be, well, I missed 2026 because you guys hadn't made this decision yet, so I want my year in 2027?
Yeah.
I mean, is that out of the question?
I don't think anything's out of the question.
I said that earlier too. Yeah.
I guess maybe, and maybe if I took a longer range view on it, maybe I would feel more in Sam's camp. I think that my reasoning for the designated student athlete demarcation, I guess, is I think that it curtails that faster. I think that it allows that to just kind of come to an end faster. And I don't know, maybe there are scenarios I'm not thinking through, but that to me feels like the sort of compromise that the NCAA would eventually come to, even though they don't like it and it's not what they want, because it has inflicted some of this chaos that we're living in right now. But I think that if they truly believe the 5-for-5 ruling will stand on its merits after we get through this sort of, gap year situation, then I think just kind of granting that right out of the gate and saying this is how it's going to happen. Therefore, the incoming freshman doesn't get affected. The athlete who just transferred thinking that they had a spot, now they don't have a spot anymore because, somebody got their fifth year. They're not affected. Like the school doesn't have to cut them from the roster if the roster limits are not in place. But I don't know. There's always something. There's always somebody going to sue for the next thing.
Yeah. In 5 years when the kid that didn't get to play as a freshman because the NCAA allowed.
Well, and that's where we're going to get to anyway, is if now you've got a 4-year high school window and a 5-year college window, and you've just shrunk the pool theoretically because it's closer to the pros, where in the pros, it depends on who ages out and how many athletes move on. Not everybody that gets drafted is going to have a roster spot because there's not always that many roster spots opening up because there's not a natural progression. And now we're going to have high school athletes who have the same situation that they're up against, where at least in the short term, that natural progression is going to change. It's going to be different. It's not going to be the same. And you're going to have smaller classes because you don't have to replace as many athletes as are coming through because you have more people graduating high school than you do, moving on from their 5th year of college. And it'll balance itself out at some point, but it's going to cause some changes for sure.
Maybe the changes in the form of a lawsuit over roster limits, still surprised that didn't happen.
Great point. Great point.
I mean, obviously it flies into the House Settlements release clause and something where the NCAA is going to say, no, you as this, this class, agreed to not sue over this. But we just saw another lawsuit get filed a couple weeks ago over an NIL Go review. So,
okay, real quick, we've talked about it in the last couple episodes, and the saga continues. Sorsby. Sounds like there's going to be a lawsuit against the NFL because he was disallowed, from entering via the supplemental draft. I don't want to belabor this, but Sam, legal expert, do they have a case against the NFL?
I think the Sorsby situation, as it kind of stands right now, as not being able to get into supplemental draft, I think it's a perfect illustration of everything we've been talking about on this podcast, vis-a-vis the difference between collective bargaining environments and non-collective bargaining environments. Antitrust lawsuits are dead in the water because of the non-statutory labor exemption, which exempts collectively bargained terms from antitrust lawsuits. We have the potential of, Sorsby Sorsby was not an antitrust litigant. He was a state law contract litigant, except that we have Section 301 of the Labor Management Relations Act, which says that any state lawsuit, including state contract lawsuit that requires interpretation of a collective bargaining agreement, is preempted by federal labor law and can't be heard at all. So there's that out of the window. Really, because of the collective bargaining agreement, the only real valid path is probably going to be through getting the NFLPA to file a grievance. I think there might be some merit to that, saying that, this provision, the decision about whether to have a supplemental draft or not have a supplemental draft, that's not intended to be used as another means for punishing players for wrongful actions. And the NFLPA could pick at that and say, well, we don't want you using this in that kind of way. But is the NFLPA going to support it? Is this the fight that they want to pick here with the NFL? Do they want to exhaust their political capital in this regard? Probably not. I think there's a lot of analogies to the Clarett v. NFL case that was filed about 12 years ago, where Maurice Clarett, of course, a sophomore, in his second year, he wanted to enter the NFL a year before he was able to, filed a lawsuit against the NFL. The NFL said no. And he lost based on the non-statutory labor exemption. And the NFLPA not only didn't support Clarett, but they actually filed an amicus brief supporting the NFL, supporting the collective bargaining agreement. And I think there's a lot to be said from that in terms of, are they going to support a player trying to challenge the draft process here? Probably not, but it's possible.
You go back to roster limits.
Yeah.
If Sorsby's granted access to the NFL and conceivably has a spot on a roster, he's taking a spot from a current NFLPA member.
Yep.
It doesn't seem like it's a hard decision for where the NFLPA is going to fall on which side of that.
And the only way it might be a hard decision is just because Sorsby's attorney is Jeffrey Kessler. Jeffrey Kessler has in the past, I don't know if he still is, represented the NFLPA as their head attorney. There's some kind of relationship there where maybe Kessler and kind of raises some conflict of interest eyebrows, and there maybe is some situation where Kessler is able to convince the NFLPA to take this case, but that might be a little far-fetched.
He was part of the NFLPA, their amicus against Clarett.
He was, yes.
Yeah. Why would this be different? Why would he, I guess in his mind, why is it different?
Because he's representing Sorsby.
Yeah, great. Love that.
Okay.
As a lawyer, you have a duty to represent your client.
Absolutely.
And be a zealous advocate for your client. And he's doing that. I think we can, quibble with the overall merits of it, but nobody can argue with the fact that he is doing everything that he should be doing to represent his client. Well, I guess some people would argue with that, but I wouldn't.
Fair.
And we'll add, there's another potential avenue for litigation here. Mike McCann brought this up in an article he wrote about this. Just thought it was intriguing enough to bring it up. Americans with Disabilities Act. There's a provision there for employees. However, as McCann noted, the ADA explicitly, in its text, excludes gambling, compulsive gambling as a disability. So that's probably dead in the water too. So, man, that would be an intriguing case.
Is he an employee?
He would be. The ADA, that provision, the title of the ADA does cover prospective employees. Yes.
Okay. Let's go unilateral decision time. Let's go back to the CSC, NIL Go. Mike, you said it, going from 600 to 15,000. You'd love to know the mental gymnastics it took to come up with that number. Seems somewhat arbitrary. So the question I pose to you guys, and maybe I'll chime in. We'll see what you guys have to say. If you were setting the review cap, at what threshold would you be setting that number at to start the review process?
That is so hard. The $600 number made sense. It made sense on a number of levels, from a tax standpoint, from independent contractors, and just how W-9s work, how 1099s work. It made sense. Whether that was completely analogous or not, whatever. But it was a number that you at least knew where it came from. I have no idea where $15,000 comes from, unless it's some sort of internal data point that says, like, this is where we started to see some statistically significant reviews that, were called into question. And perhaps that is, the only explanation here. For me, cynical. I don't even know if it matters, because you're just going to have somebody sidestep the rule no matter where you set it. And so you have, we talked about the $50,000 aggregate number. You're going to have a lot of $49,000 players who get paid in 3 equal installments over the course of their season, so that it doesn't flag a review, because someone thinks that that's winning the game and outsmarting the system. And if you set the number at 20, it would be the same thing, and you'd find a way to get that done. And so I don't even know if that matters. I don't know if, like, yes, it's annoying, and you as a university can go to an athlete and say, hey, we've got this. Like, if you come to us, like, there's no questions asked, you're not going to get reviewed. But it's all still just cap circumvention. It's all, like, your rev share agreement doesn't have to go through this process. So you're all just trying to find extra money on top of it and trying to find a way to say that it's a valid business purpose. Now you're just celebrating in the hallways because there's not an additional review period that's going to call this into question. It doesn't matter what number that's at. Like, if it's a legitimate deal within a range of compensation, which whole different thing, fair market value, whether that matters or not. But, like, if it's a legitimate business deal, then do the deal and don't worry about it. If you're worried about making sure this thing can get through this system, it's because you're probably trying to get something through the system that you're questioning yourself. And whatever the number is, you're going to set the number at. So I don't know that it really matters. 600 made sense. 600 obviously was not efficient, as we talked about at the beginning. 15,000, maybe that's a number that Deloitte and CSC have landed on based on their internal data review, and they say that this is going to help them. And probably at the end of the day, it just means that they don't have to hire a bunch more people to do all this analysis, and then it'll make everybody happy. But you could have set that number at 100,000 and we'd be having the same conversation.
Sam?
I don't think I have one. I think that we just review things based on valid business purpose and not based on range of compensation at all. And I think there's 2 reasons behind that. One is I'm just generally much more of a free market person and let people pay what they want to pay for services. And why are we second guessing what a third party wants? But also just from I think Noah Henderson had this great article in his Substack, the Front Office Sports. Highly recommend that as a read for anyone who isn't already subscribed. He made this analogy where it's like, are you more inclined to steal from a Walgreens that has cops surrounding it and armed guards and all that, or are you going to steal from a Target that has a no chase policy? And because we live in the world of the latter, like the CSC, they really don't have a lot of teeth here. They don't have a lot of enforcement power here, and if they set it too low, they're going to have pushback. They're going to have the Big Ten and the SEC as their bosses, essentially, because remember, the CSC is the Big Ten, the SEC, the Big 12, and the ACC. They're going to have them kind of pushing back on it. And also, at the same time, you're going to have class counsel getting involved. You're going to have all these different entities kind of pushing you to do things. So at a certain point, unless you get protection, whether it come from the Protect College Sports Act or come from collective bargaining or come from anything else, like, you got to make a decision about whether it's actually worth it to kind of pursue these kind of things and, piss people off. And personally, I don't think it's worth it, but that's me.
I think that makes us 3 for 3, because I wouldn't. My answer is I don't put a cap on it at all until the student athletes have a voice in it and have a seat at the table. So I think that makes us 3 for 3. But
and I misspoke on 3 equal installments, because 3 equal installments of 49,000 would obviously trigger a review. So it's got to be 4 installments. Then you're under the 15,000 individual payment.
There you go.
Anyway, there's always
3 times 15 is 45.
There's always gonna be a way.
Maybe that's how they came up with that.
I don't know. Maybe somebody will call us this week and tell us so we can inform everybody next week.
Get them on the pod.
Yeah. And with that, we'll call it an episode of Unilateral Decisions. Hope to see you next week.